A lot of noise. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Pension Fund Committee on Thursday, the 19th of March, 2026. And I particularly welcome substitute Bob Turner, who's substituting for Matthew Pink, which I don't think you've been to our committee before. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so feel free to take pictures or share on social media during the meeting. Please turn off all phones to silent or vibrate, which I've got to do, which I haven't done, whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will leave the room by the side doors and use the external fire exit to the assembly point in the car park. The public session of this meeting will be live streamed and a recording placed on the Council's website. We will adjourn after 2 hours for a short comfort break. So I'm going to turn to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. M Services, could you advise?
Thank you, Chair. So apologies have been received from Councillor Alison Whelan, who is substituted by Councillor Young, from Matthew Pink, who is substituted by Rob Turner, and from Councillor Lara Davenport-Ray.
Thank you very much. And does any member wish to disclose a pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No disclosures. Item 2 is the public minutes of the Pension Fund Committee meeting held on the 18th of December 2025 and the minutes action log. We ask to approve the minutes as an accurate record, and if any member disagrees, could they indicate? There are no objections, so we'll take that as carried. And turning to the minutes action log, do members have any questions? Or do any of the officers have any updates? I think there was only one item anyway. We're asked to note the minutes action log. No vote is required. Agenda item 3 is petitions and public questions, and none have been received this month. So we turn to item 4, the Governance and Compliance Report, which will be introduced by the Governance and Regulations Manager, Michelle Oakerson. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So the bulk of this update, I just wanted to go over where we are with the consultations affecting the LGPS at the moment. I will try and keep it as concise as possible, but as you can appreciate, there's quite a lot going on in this space at the moment. So I'll start with the Access and Fairness consultation. So where we are with that one, after a slight delayed government response, this was then published on the 2nd of February, alongside the Gender Pensions Pay Gap reporting guidance. The key takeaway from the responses was the majority of respondents agreed with all the proposals, but in large caveated most of them by the ability we have to deliver. So the government has acknowledged this point and is phasing out the changes in an attempt to ease the administrative impact. So phase 1 will come in from April, and now it's planned that phase 2 will come in later in the year. They have also confirmed that detailed guidance will be produced in conjunction with the Scheme Advisory Board for some of the key areas, but primarily around survivors' benefits, as this is an area which will be significant in terms of administration due to the retrospective nature, and of course due to some of the sensitivities around the cases also. We know this is confirmed as a phase 1 activity, so the timescales on this will be particularly tight to when the guidance come out to when we can physically start working on those. So following the response, actually just last week, the regulations have now been laid. So that part has now concluded. So we are all ready to go apart from that clarification on guidance that we're waiting for at the moment. So with the access and protections, so government has provided its response to one element of this consultation to date, and this is around the elected member access. The government intends to lay the statutory instrument in March. This will make the coming in force date the 11th of May, the first Monday after the elections. In reality, because this time round there will be members have to elect to come in. So that will be from the next available payroll point. So effectively from June 26. Makes a lot of sense from an administration point of view. Councillors will participate on broadly the same terms of other LGPS members. However, the regulations will include specific modifications for elected members, primarily because there's not the same employment rights. So, for example, pensionable pay will be based on allowances, and there'll be some restrictions around flexible retirements and redundancies, and some restrictions around shared cost AVCs and things like that. So we have a small project team focusing on the system capabilities at the moment, around from an administrative point of view, but also from the member perspective. How does that look, and how does it look for members? Or, you know, the member portal Engage and how all that's going to look, data flow, internal workflow, communications, and our internal training as well. So with this one, we're currently awaiting the regulations to be laid to allow the inclusion at the moment. The consultation responses for the remaining areas, such as Fair Deal and academies, we believe will be pushed back slightly and released at a later date. Brings us on to the Fit for the Future consultation. So draft guidance was received in December, which contained some clarification over the proposals, but there are still a few areas of uncertainty that we did feed back through the Border to Coast pool. So MHCLG had initially intended for the final regulations to come into force from the 1st of April. However, the pension schemes bill is very likely to be delayed due to amendments being requested at the Lords stage this week. In turn, this will delay the bill receiving its royal assent and consequently could delay the expected regulations and obviously the corresponding guidance to that as well. Also bearing in mind that with that delay, the Easter recess is due to run from the 26th of March to the 26th of April. So this heightens, I would say, the risk with appointing the senior officer and the independent person if those dates aren't amended also. So we've continued to prepare and mapped our governance route for the LGPS senior officer at the moment to ensure compliance with the 1st of October, as that's how it currently stands. We understand unofficially that the independent person will not now need to be a committee member, so no constitutional changes will be required. That was a point of some uncertainty for a while due to the terminology that has been used. We also understand there'll be a framework for the independent person, but this will not be available in time for the first round of appointments. So we need to start thinking about that appointment route as well. So all of those consultations going on, we've updated the risk register to capture various elements, but obviously one of the key risks is the not being able to deliver, and also in line with the conflicting priorities we also have. Obviously, we've been talking about McLeod and dashboards as well for some time as well, and that's all going on at the same time. And what you will see as we go through this agenda today in the business plan, a lot of the activities have been scoped out in there, but probably at this stage mindful that some of them probably will change as we go through the year. So very finally, just wanted to talk about the policy and strategy section. Just wanted to really draw your attention to section 4.2 in the anti-fraud and corruption policy. This was an officer review that we don't normally bring to you unless there's material changes. For this version, we did feel actually that we have made some significant changes in the fact that we have introduced biometrics now for our overseas pensioners. The traditional method is still available, but the preferred method is the biometric route. Obviously, this gives us a bit more robustness in terms of fraud in that area. It's one of our most riskiest areas. Actually, so far, I've been hearing the results of that have been quite positive. We've also introduced bank verification software, which covers both pension payments and lump sum payments, again, just to build resilience. And I probably can't go through a meeting without quickly mentioning training. So just a reminder on the training and the increased requirements coming out of the Fit for the Future consultation and legislation. Currently reviewing the training strategy, and we will bring this back to you at a future meeting just to basically make sure it's fully compliant with the new requirements when they're in place. Just a reminder that the Lola modules are compulsory and reminders are sent automatically via the Lola system, and that at the 2-year point that will reset for everybody. So depending on when you joined the committee and when you completed the training, that will be slightly different for everyone here. And very finally, one piece of additional information on the Lola platform is there is a new release due in April, which will align with all the current legislation coming in. Well, I guess I should say as much as it can do at that point, depending on where we are. Just to confirm, you'll probably receive an email about that. I'm not expecting, if you're not due to renew those modules, them to all be done again at that point, but just be mindful when your renewal date does come up, the content will be updated. And also, quite importantly, the current modules, they'll be important because they will be a current reflection of the time as well. So they're kind of the key details, but I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Michelle. As always, a very comprehensive report and a lot to cover in a few moments. Members, any questions? I can't let you get away with not having any questions, so I'll put a couple to you if I might. And I probably should have asked this a long time ago. We're not there yet, but for the independent person, what is the process? Who appoints the independent person? Is it this committee? It's probably there in the legislation, but I don't know the answer.
Yeah, so this is one point that we're seeking a bit more clarification on. Originally, when the guidance was drafted and it was referencing a non-voting member on the committee, it caused a bit of confusion in the industry because it would have been a completely different process. There would have been a constitutional route first and then the appointment that way. So at the moment, we obviously know the independent person needs to cover the 3 areas, and what we need to do, and actually what's in the business plan, is to establish what that route would look like. We know long term there will be a framework, so that will make things a bit easier because obviously they'll go through that initial scrutiny first, and then we'll have a pool. We need to be obviously careful with the independent side of it as well. So, it will, depending on who puts themselves forward for that, there will be if some companies going for that, we might not be able to use them, but it will, I believe now that point's been clarified, be almost like a normal procurement exercise like we would do with any other contract, probably in line with like we do with our independent investment advisors and that kind of thing. But Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything further.
No, I think that's fair. I think so. We would set out what the plan is in the business plan, and then you would let us run that. I mean, sometimes there is involvement of maybe a member from the committee in these processes, but I think what you'll see in a future iteration, once we understand precisely what the regulations and guidance say, is us setting out very clear, well, what we're going to do, get your agreement to that, and then we will just follow that through.
Yes, well, I mean, I guess he wouldn't be totally, or he or she would not be totally independent if members of the committee were to be responsible for the final decision. I don't know. Is it? Can I also ask? While I'm asking, I assume it will be a paid appointment as well.
Yes, absolutely. So there will be remuneration for or fees for that individual in the same way there is for the independent advisor at the moment. Obviously, I think what funds are doing broadly across the country is understanding what they have in place at the moment. In terms of independent advice, understanding the capabilities of those individuals and seeing whether actually that is an avenue. That will be no different for us to look at that as well. But ultimately, we've got to have a very formal route to a point, but we will give you line of sight on what that is.
Very much. The other question, which I'm probably going to make myself exceedingly unpopular by asking, on training, can you remind me, certainly committee members have to fulfill all the training requirements. Do subs have to also undertake that training?
Yeah, so that is actually a change that we're seeing coming through with the Fit for the Future requirements. So when we are looking, we're currently looking at reviewing the training strategy, which will include the compulsory training for substitutes also. What we've done is we knew this was coming down the line, so we've been quite proactive. We've already started including subs when we do our internal training, and we've already requested that the compulsory training's done as well. So hopefully by the time the strategy comes, we'll be in line with that anyway. But we obviously just formally want to acknowledge that point. When we get to the good governance review, things like that will obviously be looked at. So if we've got it documented and we can demonstrate we're doing it, it'll put us in a stronger position.
Speaking as a sub, I can confirm that we are required to do the training.
Actually, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I did.
Sorry, speaking as a sub, I can confirm that we are required to do the training. So, yeah.
And the usual sanctions, or if you like, that's not the word, but the rap over the knuckles will take place if those requirements are not met.
Yes, absolutely. So in the first instance, any non-compliance with training will be raised, obviously, with the chair. And then ultimately, if it goes further than that, it'll be raised with the monitoring officer as an issue of compliance. And I think the thinking is with the Fit for the Future and obviously making governance arrangements more robust is around the decision-making point, that if you've got substitutes coming in, making decisions or voting for decisions, that they should have the relevant training to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions? Well, I think we can note, we've been asked to note this report, and no vote is required on it. So I think we can move on to the next agenda item. This is agenda item 5, the annual business plan and the medium-term strategy for 26-27 to 28-29. And the report will be introduced by Head of Pensions, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's obviously a fairly detailed document as always. The format of the new business plan is broadly along the same lines as certainly last year's. The first section of the report sets out the progress against last year's activities, and as you'll see, they are mainly green, I think with one exception, which is the undecided levers, which I will come to when I talk through the current year's activities. So the new business plan is dealing with the issues coming out of the Fit for the Future, access and fairness, access and protections. And as Michelle said, there's some uncertainty on some of these. So I think what you will see during the year is us probably add activities as some of the bits which we've got in aggregate at the moment against some of those consultations are expanded. What we need to do is more known, timescales become clear. We will then add those perhaps as discrete activities if they are significant projects to undertake in isolation. Alongside those, I mean, I think we have got some clearer line of sight on the Fit for the Future, so they are mainly already in there. It's the access and protections, access and fairness activities that we have less certainty on. Alongside those, we've got the rounding off the McLeod project, rounding off pension dashboards, at least, sorry, in terms of the dashboards going live, which could be as early as October. Obviously, if that is delayed, then that will push that out into perhaps into next year's plan as well. But we'll obviously be reacting to the environment there. We've got the undecided leavers in there again, and I think I've got a credible plan to finish that off in 2 years. The new business plan does ask for a continuation of Hyman's to do the same relatively low volume of cases to support officer processing during this coming financial year. I think that what that does is give us quite a bit of certainty over the volumes we'll be able to do in this coming year, and that will leave us, I think, with a manageable number for the final year. We'll take a look at what the service needs to deliver in that final year to see whether actually we can do it internally or if we still require a sort of a low level of support again. So the Hyman's, we've allowed for similar fees to the current tranche. What that means is Hyman's will be processing quite a few from the first tranche in this coming year. The second tranche of a further 1,000 plus what we will process as well. So I think that gives us, as I say, a credible plan. In terms of what this means for resourcing, I think the next year is again going to be a really challenging one in terms of the amount of things we're juggling. What we're asking for in terms of increase in headcount is very small, relatively speaking. So we're talking about an extra 1.3 individuals for the fund. What that will be doing is two things. One, it's putting some extra into the operations team to deal with, as you'll see later in the admin report, we've had a really challenging quarter, as I signposted last time. But it will also enable us to deal with the volumes that we expect to come through from pension dashboards in terms of additional estimate requests, additional transfer requests, and just generally people having more awareness about pensions. And as I say, that could start from October this year. But we'll bring the people in early. We've got plenty for them to process in the meantime, but they'll be then ready and trained. The length of time to train an individual is probably around 9 months for them to become, really competent across a range of areas. So we can't bring people in and instantly have them be, efficient in processing. The increase in headcount is a net increase. So what we are actually doing is increasing in some areas, but actually decreasing due to efficiencies in other areas. So in Ben's area, for example, we are taking out an individual who's retiring. We don't believe we need to replace them. And so this is a net effect, which is giving more resilience, I think, in the operation side and the member-facing casework side of the operations. And we've got another smaller tweak elsewhere, which brings us to that number. In terms of financials, you'll see in section 8.6 that pooling costs are quite significant in this year. And this is because even though we are joining an established asset pool, there is a journey for the asset pool to bring in services it doesn't provide at the moment. And that includes things like advisory, implementation of asset allocations, legacy management. And one of the things that they do need to do is to bring in a system to be able to cope with that. If you can imagine, there are thousands and thousands of lines of legacy assets that need to be managed. And so that system is mentioned within that narrative. I should say what we have done is avoided 10 million of build costs by not moving to Access. So the numbers would have been considerably higher if we had moved to Access. The other thing to note on the financials, if I could just bring your attention to section 8.4, where we set out the business as usual budget for dashboards. Previously, we've talked about implementation. When we did that, I did mention that we need to record the note of, your approval of that for the pensions regulator, who has certain requirements around reporting that we have to retain records of where decisions were made. So if I could just bring your attention to the fact by approving the budget, you will be approving that business as usual budget for dashboards as well. So we've got that on the record as a recommendation. The climate action plan is in this report as well. I think it's characterized by some fairly obvious things that we will be doing in terms of reporting, etc., but lots of dialogue with Border to Coast to understand how they operate, sort of like it links into what the transition of our assets will be, what they have on the platform, for example, to enable us to continue with lower carbon passive like investments. So there's a number of areas on that climate action plan that relate to that dialogue. I think, Chair, that's all I have to go through, but happy to open it up now for questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. So you've asked for a net increase in resources, and you talked about systems and the need for a system here. I wonder if you just could comment on how much is done by our internal staff and how much is done by consultants, and whether you're happy with the mix of how that's all organised, and whether any of the changes that we're about to make change any of that.
So the resource heavy areas are all internal, apart from the assistance that I've mentioned by Hymans. But I mean that quite frankly is just a thousand cases, which is really quite low. So on the operation side, and the other areas where we're dealing with casework, which might be in the project team as well, for example, and this is well over, this is probably getting on for 2/3 of the service now. It's all internal. Where we tend to get the advice is around matters such as actuarial, obviously investments. So there's been a lot of investment consultancy this year, particularly because we've had to determine an appropriate asset pool. So I think the balance is what it needs to be. It will change with Fit for the Future, in the sense that we will be getting advisory services from the asset pool, but they won't be as comprehensive as they are at present. And so I think we're going to have to build up some internal capability to answer to deal with some of the queries, for example, that we use support at the moment. So I think that's probably the biggest area of change in terms of consultancy. Is that sorry?
Yeah, so 1.3 FTE sounds very modest to me then in those circumstances.
Yeah, well, I think we already got we've got a lot of resources already. So I don't think we're one of the funds who is suddenly significantly increasing their project teams. And indeed, some of the losses of staff we've had over the last year has been where they've gone to neighbouring funds to build up their project teams. So we always had very good view of what we thought we needed, and so really it's tweaking those resources to make sure they're right. I do think whilst we've got a challenging year or two, depending on quite how intense some of the access and fairness, access and protections work is, I think the work, because we will no longer then have dashboards or McCloud in terms of implementation and delivering, our unprocessed levers will be cleared. So I think that's when we can start looking at whether we can decrease resource actually. So I think it's just tweaking to make sure, in particular in operations, we have the right level. And if I'm over establishing, then we can obviously deal with that down the line.
Thank you.
So I had two particular questions or points, and the first relates to the previous point. I'm a bit concerned that we won't have enough resource to deal with everything we need to deal with next year. And I was curious to get your view on how the extra resource will link to KPIs, and will we have next year be having the conversation that we missed the KPI because we didn't have enough resource to solve a problem? That was the first one. And the second one is, you talked about are people taking 9 months to bring up to speed, and clearly planning for resource is going to have to be a longer-term process. I'm just curious about how you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean we've made changes to improve the our, if you like, training. So we over a year ago we introduced a training officer. Before the training was all done within the team, but actually what they now do is they go into and get some sort of generalized training for a period, and then they're moved into the team. So that's very helpful and enables the the front facing teams to be able to better concentrate on the work they need to do. I think I am always reluctant to make significant increases in resources because that in itself is a problem. So what we try to do is make sure we are always as fully established as we can. So as soon as someone leaves, we immediately seek to replace them. I mean, that may sound like common sense, but obviously in lots of areas of the council, that doesn't happen because they're trying to maintain vacancies. So I think if we were, if we had everybody in place and they were all trained, then we probably have more than we need. But the reality is we're not in that place. So it's always about making sure, except in the absences we're going to have, it's allowing for those, making sure we've got the right resource. I think again, it will come out in the wash. We can plan projects so that we know the priority ones we're going to do, and then so we're not trying to do everything at once. And if anything, that's probably the challenge we've had at the moment. There's been a few projects where the timescales mean we've had to do them at the same time. I'm hoping that won't be the case for some of the work that's coming on next year. But if I need to come to you midway through the year and say, actually, we do need to increase by another person or whatever, I will do so.
Yeah, and I guess from my perspective, we just don't want you to be under-resourced. It's laudable to try and balance the books, but it's a relatively small cost for a relatively big gain potentially.
Yeah,
for some of the things we're looking at.
Yeah. So I was just to say, obviously we do have two funds. So what we're actually doing is putting 4 people into operations. So for the 2 funds, it's 4 people. The net impact for Cambridgeshire is 1.3 because of reductions elsewhere. But in terms of those front-facing staff dealing with casework, it is actually 4 people across the 2 funds.
It would be surprising if I didn't have a question for you or two, Mark. I think everybody will note from the projections from 2026-27 or immediately in 26-27 rather than beyond, the investment income falls. So we don't have too much of an explanation for that in the documentation itself. I'm assuming that this reflects some of the transition costs that will be passed, well, as they transition to Borders to Coast. I think it's gone down to 94 million, your projection from 100 million in the previous year. Clearly, we're not bearing costs as we did with Access. I'm assuming that the costs of the overall administration fall to the company, Borders to Coast, and all those costs are paid out of the company. So why has this fallen? And is that the reason?
Yeah. So the estimate initially for 25-26 was 84 million, and the estimate for 26-27 is 94. So we are assuming an increase generally. However, the actual for 25-26 is 100. And the reason is because you may recall we received a significant dividend from the bank of 10 million, and we haven't allowed for it in 26-27, but there is certainly a decent probability that a further dividend will be paid out, and if it does, then obviously it will make it comparable. But yes, taking that out, we're kind of allowing for an increase in investment income overall.
Taking into account transition costs.
Well, transition costs.
Well, I mean, it's net, isn't it?
Yeah. So transition costs, we at the moment we have not made any sort of allowance for what they will be in terms of we have no idea what the timing will be. We're having a conversation with Borders to Coast actually within the next 2 weeks, where we're going to get the plan for each of the assets. But we are aware, for example, that some of our liquid assets are certainly will be where they are for at least another year. I can't say too much in public session, but in effect, there will be a broad plan for each of our assets. Some of them will clearly stay until they run off. in the liquids. So talking about, and some of the liquids will have very low transition fees because they are things like gilts, for example.
So they won't be shown as a separate item. They'll be shown net, or we will see the net.
Well, they are. I mean, they're not income in that sense either. So what you would see is a reduction in the value of the capital value of the asset. If we moved it and there was transition, you would just see it at a lower value post transition, as it were.
Howard.
I was reading through the risk management section of the report, and the first risk is about geopolitical risks. And I wondered how much stress testing we'd done of both the investment returns and the budget in light of those geopolitical risks that are currently around.
I think this is something which I'm sure Jonathan will pick up later in the when we talk about the strategic asset allocation and what their thoughts are around returns around different asset classes. So if it's okay to, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, this one's a question on transfers into the scheme. I think transfers into scheme were projected to be like a 3-year average, and we've got an estimated position which is close to half of that. So what do you think is causing the reduction in transfers into the scheme for this year?
I don't know. We'll have to come back to you on that. It is incredibly variable from year to year, so that's why we do kind of a best estimate based on that average. But I'm not aware of particular factors that would impact it this year. We'll have to do some digging on that for you.
Yeah, I guess that individual lump sums could move that number quite a bit, but it still looks like 14.5 million versus an expected 26 looks quite significant, and we've got estimates for future years as well, which are relatively high, so they might need to be tweaked down. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know.
Yeah, I think if the current year is high, then that does feed through to the following years, obviously being to some degree higher. So that would how you kind of end up at those future years. But the question as to what's caused this year to be so much higher than budget is something we can look into.
Okay, thank you.
Just a small aspect of what I was asking before. We've got a £250,000 one-off cost for special system setup costs with BCPP. We don't estimate anything further, and the question really is that because all the costs will be borne by the company BCPP? I mean, we're paying in, of course, our capital to join BCP, which is obviously quite separate. I think is reported later, but we're not anticipating an annual subscription or payment in the way that we did to Access.
So there will be clearly sent in similar way to Access. Pooling has centralized costs, and then it has costs attached to each sub fund you invest in. So you have a flow through of the Border to Coast fees into the sub fund. So when we're calling out Border to Coast or Access costs, those are the centralized costs. And what we have identified clearly is that there are certain project costs this coming year. They will not be repeated, although there may be future. There will clearly always be a project budget within an organisation of that scale. We're not expecting a repeat, of course, of the implementation costs of a new system, but the running costs of that system will be allowed for in what we're projecting forward. So there will be ongoing costs for it, but not the implementation costs.
Future estimates.
Well, they're obviously far more modest. I mean, obviously we put the value of the system in, which is quite a significant amount, but the running cost of it will be far lower, of course.
And the small amount that we're paying every year and will continue to pay for many years to Access are in these figures as well.
Yes, I mean Access is effectively in wind down mode. So there is a decrease in budget. I think last year was
No underspend, was
yeah,
it?
yeah. Last year there was an underspend, but last year was higher than it would otherwise have been because obviously Access was looking at building a company for a period, and there was all those costs involved in that. They will fall away in future years, and they'll be very modest costs.
Okay, if there are no further questions and no further comments, we can move to the recommendations. We're being asked to, I'm going to read it out, note the status of the 25-26 year-end business plan activities and year-end position. Note the procurements undertaken during 25-26. Approve the contents of the business plan and medium-term strategy and associated budget, including the 25-26 year-end financial position. Note the business as usual budget for pension dashboards and note the 2026-27 climate action plan. Members confirm? Thank you very much. And now we move on to item 6, which is the General Code of Practice Review, which will be introduced by the governance specialist, Madalena. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will just summarize the report. So just for context, as you might know, the pension regulator's General Code of Practice came into force in March 2024. The code is a consolidated framework for governance and administration, and it sets the standards all pension funds are expected to meet. During 2024-2025, once the code came into force, we carried out the full compliance review using a compliance checker provided by Hymans Robertson. That review showed that the fund is largely compliant with only a small number of areas needing further improvement. As a result, we developed a 9-point action plan to address those, and this report presents an update on that action plan. As of today, 7 of the 9 actions are complete, as you can see in the table in section 3.2. The remaining 2 actions, which are around finalizing process notes and testing our business continuity plan arrangements, will be completed by the end of April 2026. Also, during 2026, our intention is to create a compliance log. This log is going to be used for testing performance against the requirements of the code. So essentially, that means the compliance review will become a business as usual activity. This is everything I wanted to cover, but I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Madalena. Take questions? Yes.
Yeah, there's probably just ignorance on my part, but does the code, does it cover communications to members around ethical investment policies? Because as I understand it, a number of members have questioned whether they've ever been consulted on something like that until very recently. Would you know?
I do know that the code has a section specifically on communication, but I will have to go through the details and send a separate email about it because I can't say off the top of my head now, but I'll come back on that.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the first part. Did you was it about that we hadn't communicated with members around?
No, the question was if the code covers communication to members around ethical investments, responsible investments.
I'm not aware I'm not aware the code does, but there are requirements in around investment strategy. Sorry, my voice is gone.
That's okay. Yeah, you can take a drink and come back in a minute.
We do need to consult on the investment strategy, and as part of that, obviously, the part of that is a responsible investment policy. So through that, we feel we have a requirement to consult on those matters effectively anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Be asking questions again. Just on internal controls, I mean, we do have a annual or regular internal audit, although it's obviously got to fit in with the internal auditors program. Presumably, they've got very comprehensive internal control documentation in order to be able to do their work. I mean, probably I'm telling you something that must be in existence. Is it about tightening up those controls or changing or formalising in some way that we don't already have?
I think the rationale behind it is that with the independent governance review that will take place and the requirement to prove to the pension regulator that we meet the requirements, that we keep a compliance log so we can prove that we regularly look at the code of practice and make sure that actually we said that our internal controls are there, but are there every time. So our one of our officers will look into that and keep the log ongoing.
Glasgow Section 151 officer, presumably you are satisfied with our internal control systems.
I mean, as it stands from the evidence that I've received from ongoing discussions with the team and from internal audit, there's no audit issues or control issues that are being flagged to me, and we do have those regular meetings. So yes, satisfied.
Glad to hear it. Any further questions? Thank you, Madalena. Sorry, well, we have to note that we've noted the report and we're satisfied. Thank you very much. And we move on to item 7, which is the data improvement strategy and plan. The head of pensions will introduce the report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Not much to add on this. The strategy has had some quite light changes as set out in section 3.3 around just aligning it with the legislative framework, stakeholders, etc. But particularly because we've introduced some new arrangements for mortality and tracing, which Michelle touched upon, obviously, during her governance report. The plan itself, I think, contains mainly things that actually appear in other activities. So a lot of what is data improvement are actually the very projects we're dealing with, dashboards, unprocessed leaves, etc. The first data improvement activity is perhaps a bit different. This feeds into our data score that goes to the pensions regulator. So it's looking at things like the common data, things like national insurance number, addresses, etc. So we have it's almost like a continuous improvement plan for those as well. But I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. I don't have anything further to add.
Howard.
I was trying to get a measure of where we are on data quality. And I just was curious, if you were able to give it a RAG rating, where would you put our data quality?
It's somewhere between green and amber, I would say. Certainly, the actuary actually does provides a view on it as part of the valuation process, and they I'm not going to put words in Stephen's health, but I think it was in fairly good health. I don't know if you want to come in, Stephen.
Thank you. Apologies, Councillor. Could you ask the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, so I was thinking about the state of our data quality. Obviously, the data improvement plan relates to that data quality.
Yeah.
And if we were to regulate our data quality, where would it be? And I'm actually just quite curious about the areas that are in the amber area or on a trend downwards rather than upwards.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for the question. It's certainly the case that the data we received for the valuation was fit for purpose. For that valuation, it's important to note that when we're looking at the data, we're assessing whether it's appropriate for those valuation calculations. We're not applying that through a lens of whether it's accurate from a paying members their benefits point of view. So we don't have that RAG analysis, but we've certainly provided a detailed data report to the fund so they can identify or further explore some of the minor issues that we've identified through that valuation data process. So fit for purpose, but the valuation, and more work for officers to do to look at some of those minor issues. Thank you.
In terms of the areas which we're concentrating, it is things like having unprocessed records. So whilst it's fit for purpose for the valuation purpose, clearly we want the record processed and finalised. So I would sort of provide that as an area. I think addresses are always a challenge. That feeds directly into the common data score with the regulator. We know it's can be quite futile sometimes, tracing the address of a deferred member only for the address to be wrong again a few years later. So we're aware of that, and I think probably when we did a whole of fund exercise, what we learned from that the first time we did it was that it's not a black and white whether the address is correct or not. There's a degree of confidence in what you have, and that actually is a really challenging thing to deal with. So I think certainly I do find addresses a particularly challenging area. But if we concentrate on the areas within the plan, then I think we are, we move to a really comfortable position and a healthy position.
I don't think we would demur from that. That seems a pretty good approach. So unless any more questions, let's move to the recommendations. The committee being asked to approve the data improvement strategy and approve the 2026-27 data improvement plan. All good. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the communication strategy and 2026-27 communications plan. And I think, sorry, no. I'm asked to note one point of clarification before we begin, that recommendations should read review the communications plan and not necessarily approve it. I don't know. But a couple of words were missing from the published papers anyway. With that clarification, can I ask Corey Blows to introduce the report? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. Very little to say on this report at all, mainly just to take questions. We did review the strategy last year, and we reviewed it again this year. We felt there was no changes to be made to the strategy itself this time, but we have included the communication plan for your review and comment as an appendix to the report, and I'm happy to take any questions on that communications plan.
I thought you were going to ask. Did you want to ask on this one? No, you didn't. It may well be more germane to the performance report, but where we have slipped up for whatever reason, staff sickness, absence of staff, and we fall behind in our responses to members' queries. I haven't looked through it in detail, I must be honest. Does the communication strategy deal with that adequately? Are we getting back to people to let them know when their queries will be dealt with and so forth?
So that's an issue that isn't covered by this communication strategy. This is more about wholesale member engagement. That would be in the administration strategy where we have KPIs and responding there.
It's still communications, but it's not that communication.
So I just got a question on the type of responses, the response level you get on things like member satisfaction surveys. So I don't know if that's something that you can cover, but it looks like we're putting something out. Well, the plan is to put something out monthly to both active and deferred members. I was just interested to see what kind of response rate you get on that.
Yeah, so the nature of those surveys is it's a transactional survey. Like when you do something with your bank, you might get a text message afterwards that says, how did we do in this transaction? So we're targeting to people that we've communicated recently with to see what they get. I don't have the exact numbers to hand, but we do get regular responses to that. We review the levels of the scores that come on that. That's passed around the whole management team when they come in, and it's done on a monthly basis, effectively.
I can confirm the rates in the next in the admin when we go through the admin report. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say they're in the admin report in the next one, so we can.
Well, we're racing through the agenda this morning. I expect we'll wake up for it in the next section. But anyway, let's move to the recommendations on this. The committee is asked to note that no further changes are recommended to the communication strategy, and we have reviewed the communications plan in Appendix 1. Oh, I beg your pardon, Liz. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I just had a question around will you still be doing kind of in person? I know you mentioned road shows, but those kind of in person, because I guess that might reach the harder to reach people where data might be inaccurate just because they don't communicate online, etc.
Yeah, so absolutely. We mentioned this previously. So one of the big themes that we're doing this year is a real member engagement strategy, trying to produce a number of different videos on different things, picking up on the wider engagement that will be out there in the pensions world because of things like pension dashboards. So those road shows are going to be timed for September because they fall just after the annual benefit statements have been issued, just before the pension dashboard comes online. So we feel that will be the maximum point of interest amongst members, and that will be getting out into those into some of the larger employers to talk to people. But we do that fairly regularly as well. So just this week on Monday, one of the members of my team went out to give a presentation to depot staff who don't normally have access to a computer. So we went out and gave them some information about the pension, engaging things that they should be doing at different points in their life. And we've done that with other employers in recent months as well. So we do try to get out to those members that are not desk-based and maybe need that more face-to-face engagement.
Thank you for that. Sorry to have not seen you, Liz. Well, I'll read out the recommendations again. Committee is asked to note that no further changes are recommended to the communication strategy, and that we've reviewed the communications plan in Appendix 1. Members, yes, thank you very much. No vote is required. We move on to the administration and performance report, which is going to be presented by the head of pensions, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'm sure there'll be questions, obviously, on this report because the performance has been.
I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry for a moment. Sorry. Just got to remind you that there are 2 appendices to the report, which are to be heard in the exempt section. So, if you've got any questions on those, could you indicate so that we can not ask the question, but so that I know that you will want to ask questions on those? Yeah, you do. Okay. Yeah, sure. So we'll take those later in the meeting when we move to the closed session. And sorry, I come back to you.
Yes, of course, thank you. Yes, so performance has been challenging. I signposted that it would be a challenging quarter at the last meeting, but I think it was fair to say it was a more challenging period than even I was expecting. It feels like we are through that now. So in January, the indicators are going back to green. I think February, I've not seen the Cambridgeshire funds, but it certainly won't be the red across the board that we had during this period. If you recall, what caused this was we lost a number of staff for various reasons from our operation teams at the same time, just before we got the most busy period that we have each year, which is the post-August leavers. So whilst we don't administer the teacher scheme, we do have many thousands of people at educational establishments, and that is our busiest time of year. Those feed through in September, sometimes in October. I was expecting performance to be poor, but then improve in October. In the end, it was the performance or the if you like, some of the backed up work flew through in November. What we had to do was to put an extra 4 staff into the operations teams to maintain even the performance that we got here. We obviously tried to recruit to the vacancies, which we did successfully. So those staff did come in, but it takes a month to 2 months to get an individual replaced. Then there is the training after that. And so I think I moved the staff into that team, not only to try to keep the performance up, but equally to protect the staff who were remaining in the team. Because of course, some of our front-facing teams is the most time-sensitive area of the office in terms of workflow, and in many ways, the highest pressure. Having said that, and turning to so obviously the KPIs are recorded. There's lots of reds, and as I said, they do pick up, as we pointed out in the report. They picked up from November to December, but they picked up particularly in January. Having said that, the the responses to the surveys that Councillor Ali was just mentioning, you can see in section 3.2 of the report, we issue up just under 450 surveys. We get response rates. This is fairly typical, quite low response rates. It tends to be responses from people who have something to say. So I was quite, in a way, it's quite surprising that the rating that we had out of 5 was 3.68 to 3.93 over this period of real challenge. I was expecting it to, and it could have been lower. So in a sense, that was quite pleasing. What we try to do is to communicate as the best we can if we're delayed, how long that delay is going to be. But unless you can give someone certainty over when they're going to get their information or benefit, it is sometimes a bit futile. But we do the best we can on that front. The other thing I would say is that if you are not processing on time, we have a help desk, which is staff, so people can contact us by phone, unlike some pension funds. It creates a lot of queries of people chasing, so it becomes a bit of a vicious circle. So I think during this couple of months, we suffered from that as well, in that we were spending a lot of time explaining when people would receive things. We're obviously in a much better place now, because the staff are in, and because they are now a number of months through their training, so they're also all processing work, and we will also get the additional resource that you agreed in the business plan as well. So that, I'm hoping that we will have plenty of green, certainly once those are in place, but it should look a lot better than this at the next quarterly monitoring. So that's the KPIs. In terms of what have we done to try to make this not happen again, and particularly because I think my ability to parachute staff in next year will not be the same, because of certainly if dashboards go live in October, it will clash precisely with the period when we had to do it this year. So it is about having that, maintaining that establishment. But I have also introduced a role which will prevent, I believe, individuals leaving to go to other funds, because there was a role which we didn't have, which some other funds did have, which is a senior pensions officer. So it kind of sits between the pensions officer and the team leader. So we are just asking staff to put in expressions of interest at the moment for that, and we will be switching out half a dozen of our pensions officer for senior pensions officer roles. It has barely impact on the budget. It has been put into the budget that you've just approved. It doesn't change the head count, but it does give, I think, that resilience. Beside that, and kind of tied to Fit for the Future and the senior LGPS officer role, we will also just be having a look at our top level structure to make sure we are aligned with what we need to be to add resilience to the fund. I'm aware that I've, in a positive way, this is good. We've developed people, they have moved on and have got head of pensions roles, or heads of administration at other funds, because the opportunity isn't within our structure. If there's something we can do to kind of retain staff, then we will look at that. So that's another thing I'm looking to do, which will add resilience, I think, to the service. The only other thing I wanted to just mention on this report was around the risks. So obviously this encompasses a risk review as well, and we've done quite a bit of work on that to realign to the fact we've moved from access to border to coast. So you'll see some changes there, but also the Fit for the Future requirements as well, and particularly the advisory. We've added a risk around that conflict of interest there is when a asset pool is advising us on what to invest in, and at the same time is responsible for the implementation of those investments. So that risk mitigation is around things like having proper oversight at the pool level and at the fund level. And I think when we come to the Fit for the Future report later, we can go into some of the pool level mitigations. So please be aware of those changes in the risk, which are set out in the table in the report, but the detail is obviously within the actual appendices. happy to take any questions on those or any other aspect of this report.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm sorry I jumped the gun a little bit before on the communications with members who might be a little dissatisfied or with the delays. Nothing could be more important than keeping them up to date with progress of their inquiry. So I think you've explained that very well. Thank you very much. Karen.
Thank you. I got a bit confused by what you said. The dashboard appearing in October, which is the busy time. Can you explain why that's a problem? I mean, yes, because to me, the dashboard is information for interested parties on their position, presumably that's what it is. So how does that what rule did you introduced to avoid the problem? I really just didn't understand what you said. And then the other thing was, how does promoting a whole group of people help solve a resourcing issue if they're just the same people with a slightly different job title? I didn't understand that either. Thank you.
Of course. So the dashboard's first. So if it goes live in October, the majority, well, we're hoping that the majority of transactions would be automatic and system based, in the sense that a request will come through from the dashboard ecosystem, and our system will automatically return data. The problem is created if we can't return value data to the dashboard ecosystem, and that will be if there's mismatches, but also potentially if we have unprocessed levers sitting there. So we would then have to prioritize probably within 10 working days to clear that unprocessed lever. And so what it means is our project team in particular will be tied up. It will still be clearing down unprocessed levers, but it will be prioritizing them potentially based on what comes in from the dashboard, particularly if there's any form of big bang where you get lots coming through, if there's advertising nationally, for example. And the reason that links to the busy time of year is it was project staff that I moved over to help support the team, and so the project staff might be tied up on other matters. And equally, beyond the dashboards, we're aware that we've got a very busy list of activities to do, and if government, for example, says you need to look at your survivor records and deal with those in a very tight timescale, that would create an additional pressure. The second question was around how does changing effectively the role of a number of staff help. We have lost individuals to senior pensions officer roles elsewhere, and we have had people apply for jobs for senior pensions officer roles elsewhere for very small financial uplift. And so if we introduce it, it will prevent those individuals needing to apply for jobs elsewhere just to get some form of progression. Sometimes, it will be it may be because actually that role is where they want to be in terms of their career. It might be a stepping stone to, say, a team leader position or what have you, but either way, it will clearly add some resilience to the service.
Thank you. Can I ask another question, please? Yeah. So the risks that you've got here, there's quite a few amber ones. And in particular, I wonder, there's the Border to Coast is starting in 2 weeks. I think we're moving over to them. And it says it does not, one of them is, and it's amber, does not have the investment options available to enable the pool to implement the funds.
I'm going to stop you. Can you tell us the page you're looking at?
Oh, yes,
Because
sorry.
I want to make sure it's not on the confidential page.
Yes. Okay, what page 132?
Sorry. Which page? Sorry.
132.
132. Okay.
I thought it was public. Sorry.
No,
129, I think, is the table which shows those risks added and removed.
Detail. Okay, sorry. Please carry on.
Yeah, am I okay to go? Yeah. Right. So yeah, so that the border to coast doesn't have the ability to implement our investment strategy. I wondered, I mean, that's fairly fundamental. I wondered whether you could comment on that.
Yes, I mean, I mean, this particular risk was actually just a substitute of what wasn't a very similar risk for access to border to coast. Although obviously the nature of how it will work in operation, I think over the next few years will change, because with access, there was a degree of access put in place what we needed from a strategic investment perspective. With border to coast, obviously, because who implements has changed, we set our strategy and then we almost handed over to border to coast to implement that strategy. And effectively they will do the best they can. But if we had a requirement was quite unusual, and other funds didn't need it, then we might not get that put on the platform. So I think there is a possibility that funds might have sort of very specific requirements that cannot be met through the pool, because there is no no one else wants that particular requirement. Do I think this is going to happen? I think the pool will have in place pretty much everything we need, from what I understand about what the options available, and even things like our passive. They are looking at what they can put in place to enable funds like ours to continue with those sorts of investments.
So how is that process going to be managed? I mean, are they going to say, do you have a regular update from, is that the idea from border to coast? I wanted to say BPHA for some reason. How are you going to manage that? We want you to do this, and they come back and say, yes, but maybe not until next year or something. How is that going to go?
Yeah, so there are so border to coast are very good at putting in place sort of like working groups behind the scenes for all aspects. So certainly there are things for like oversight, but there are for equity propositions, for example, there is a working group of fund officers that hold regular meetings to look at what the funds need to have in place, and now the equity proposition range kind of interacts with those needs. I would just caution, that the world is changing, in that what government we expect them to set within the guidance that is coming out is that we set quite high level strategic asset allocation allocations, and then we set out through our investment strategy, we set out our beliefs, be those sort of generalized or responsible investment, and from the combination of that strategy and those beliefs, that's how they will come to the conclusion as to what they need to implement. But I think please just recognize that we're in this halfway house until full implementation services come on board at border to coast, where, if you like, the management is over the border to coast, as it will be to every other asset pool. And so whilst we might have, might in the past, for example, had very niche requirements, and they were very detailed into, sub-asset classes or even below, that won't be the case going forward. So I think that risk will kind of ease off as implementation moves over to border to coast.
That's very interesting. So we're generally having a slight taking away of control under the new regime. So we won't, beyond that broad strategy that we set, we're not really going to have much of a say. Is that fair?
I think it's fair to say that there will be less control, but you will still have control, because you will still be responsible for the strategy itself. And I mean, generally 80% of the returns come from the strategic allocation. The remaining 20% tend to come, particularly things like equity, come from the actual, what manager you're choosing. So there will be still significant local control, but I mean, it's certainly something that was fed through the consultation that it is reducing.
Probably also fair to say that we've always had a high proportion of funds within access as well. So that control, we can exercise the same level of control as we did with access. I mean, I can't remember what the percentage was, but 80% of funds were in access.
Do you mean what we've got invested in the access platform?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, we will have everything on through Border Coast, whether it's even if it's being overseen by them because it's a legacy asset, literally everything will be under Border Coast management at a point in the near future.
Sorry, I've got a couple of further questions. How is that? Because it's happening very shortly. How is that? Are we feeling okay about the transition from access to Border to Coast? There's obviously lots of administration to get the money and the investments under the control of a different party. How is that going? Are we feeling okay about that?
I mean, yes. So I think we can go into the detail when we talk about Fit for the Future, but it is. I mean, one of the reasons we decided on Border to Coast was what we understood to be the relationship they had between the company and the funds, and it is genuinely a partnership. So it's not in Border to Coast's best interest to do something which is contrary to what the funds want or need. And certainly everything we've seen is there's an incredible amount of involvement of fund officers in terms of ensuring that what is put in place is appropriate. Having said that, we can't get away from the fact that there have been changes imposed by government through the Fit for the Future consultation that we expect to flow through the pensions bill and the legislation and guidance. And I think the pinch points in terms of issues are exactly as we set out in the consultation, and some of it will just we'll see how it for example how advisory works once Border to Coast provide that, and you will quite frankly you will experience it as members of the committee.
Sorry, my question was really a practical one. Is the handover happening properly? Yeah.
Yes, I mean absolutely. So we've got a very sort of detailed plan of what we're having to do, and we're having weekly meetings with Border to Coast, if not more than one meeting each week, to make sure everything is progressing. So and that's from the practical steps of becoming a shareholder, in terms of the documents that need to be signed, to the development of the investment management agreement, for example, which is where all the different services are set out. We're involved in every stage of that. So it seems to be going really well at present time.
And also a fair amount of total due diligence has been undertaken as far as, going back to your original question, as far as the governance and the processes are concerned, and everybody is satisfied. And I looked at some of the documentation myself. There are strong controls, and I think that we can be confident that our investments will be looked after and processed and pretty well hopefully aligned with our investment beliefs and responsible investment criteria, and obviously our return requirements as well. So I think that, and there are mechanisms to ensure that we do have some say, for example, representation in the decision-making body of the administration body, and feeding up the line to the investment managers themselves. They are the investment managers.
If I could just say finally, sorry, on this point, obviously all the documents have statutory officer oversight, but there is also legal reviews of literally everything that is being signed, and that's either collectively across the whole of the Border to Coast funds, including the existing partners, or if it's specific to what we're doing as a new group joining. We've got our own collective review with legal advisors as well, and specialist legal advisors with knowledge of this investment area.
And then, sorry, final question. Could you explain about what are the legacy assets? Now, I noticed that they now are moving to border to coast as well. Could you just explain what they are, please?
Yeah, what's being badged legacy is generally the liquids, whereby they're going to sit and run off, or a decision will be made at a point in time. So this is infrastructure, private equity, I mean to extent property, albeit there is a Border Coast Property Fund. It will include things like the bank and our building society investment, whereby, and indeed the Foresight Regional Fund, whereby sort of like we certainly see those as more strategic in nature, and we would want to really closely understand what is happening to those. But it's all of those, and so even if they remain for 10 plus years because they're closed-ended funds that have a life, rather than us keeping the eye on those in the way we do at present, it will be Border Coast that will have the oversight of those assets.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen, for questions. It's good to keep everybody on their toes, and it's good that you're coming in. You have attended meetings previously, but you're looking at it with fresh eyes, as it were, and that's very healthy. Anyway, we are asked to move to the recommendations as set out in the report. Now, I'm not going to read them out in detail. They are on your agenda, but there are 5 elements to this, mainly noting the contents of the reports. But it is there before you if anybody's got any questions on the wording of any of those items. But if you are content to approve, we will take, well, we don't need to vote, but we'll move on to the next item. We're good? Thank you very much. And we move on to item 10, the Pension Fund Committee Agenda and Plan, which I think, again, is before you. I don't know if you want, we don't need to present it, but Michelle Oakenson will respond to any questions if we have any on them. Right. Well, this is good news because we're obviously going to be able to devote a little bit more time to the important matters that come up in the next section. No vote is required. We've noted the agenda plan. The remaining agenda items are exempt from publication, so the committee will need to decide whether to exclude the public and press from the remainder of the meeting whilst these are discussed. This exclusion would be on the grounds that the reports contain exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. That is information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Is there a consensus amongst members in support of the recommendation to exclude press and public? And if there's anyone who objects, please make their objections known. I don't think I need to move to a vote. We're all in favour. So we've resolved to move into private section, and we're going to close the public session of the meeting, so the live stream will end very shortly. Perhaps I can ask Shenda to do that for us. I'm going to suggest we take a break now before we move to the next section. Thank you very much, everybody.